Once we've got a picture of the assets that are available to be deployed, we have to imagine the particular way in which those assets are going to be used in a productive activity, usually of a government organization, or perhaps on occasion several different government organizations operating together to produce a new set of outputs which, when introduced into the status quo, would turn out to make a difference in the social outcomes that we've got. I think the critical difference there is to understand that within operations, there are many things that are what could be called support operations, and many of those have to do with amassing the resources and assembling them for various productive activities. Other parts of them have to do with reporting on the performance of the organization to outside agencies and to develop information that can support accountability and learning inside the organization as it goes about its business. But the critical thing usually turns out to be the outputs of the organization, the particular activities that make contact with the world in a way that we hope will transform the world in a particular way. So that when you're looking at the operational production process of an organization, it's often important to distinguish between the whole mush of activities that are carried on in an organization and the particular places in which it begins to make contact with the world in a way that could plausibly matter to the transformation of the social conditions. It's also, going back to the first thing that we said, because this is going to be a change, we're always going to be innovating here to some extent in the production process. And the innovations can occur in a variety of different parts of the production process and a lot of different parts of the organization. But all innovations are going to carry with them a certain kind of risk because we're not entirely sure about what the results are going to be, and therefore they'll nearly always require some special authorization. But nonetheless, all that burden has to be carried forward if we're going to influence the production processes and change the way they're currently being done in order to achieve the desired result. Many of the outputs of an organization involve transactions with individuals. So I'd like now to talk about the interface between the outputs of the organization and the clients, all right? And I use the word client for a special reason. For many people, when they think about the individuals that are on the other side of the bureaucratic counter, if you will, they want to call them customers. Because they look a lot like customers in a private sector organization. They're the people on the other side of the counter for whom we're producing a particular product and service. And then there's an idea about public value, which would be that we should make sure that the customers of the organization are satisfied and happy with what happens to them, all right? Now that's an important idea, but and it's certainly an important idea that we should be concerned about the subjective experiences of the people we're encountering on the other side of the counter. But I think it's important to see that the people on the other side of government counters are not exactly customers. There are many people on the other side of the government counter who are not receiving benefits at all or things that they'd like to have happen to them, but instead are having duties imposed on them through the use of government authority. So regulated industries, people who have to get licenses to do buildings, etc., all have burdens that are being placed on them. And they, of course, might not prefer not to have that burden placed on them, but that burden is being placed on them in the hope that they might come into compliance and behave in a way that could contribute to a public purpose, all right? So we'll call those people client obligatees, all right? There's another group of people that get benefits, and you might think they look a lot more like customers, but the thing about the client beneficiaries is that often they're not paying the whole price of for the service or good that they get. And the good and service is often coming with a certain set of restrictions. There are only certain people who are going to be eligible for this particular benefit, so the people who would like to get it have to qualify themselves by providing information to the government about themselves that shows whether they do or do not have the qualifying characteristics. It also often comes, the services often come with conditions that say, in order to continue receiving this benefit, you'll have to do the following things, right? So that even in those cases where it looks like what we're doing is delivering a benefit to people, the authority of the state is present there at the same time. So as we're imagining these transactions with individuals, we have to see that they are a combination of service encounters and obligation encounters. And many things that the government does in its interactions with its citizens are combinations of the two, all right? And in the background of that is the simple fact that the resources that are being used to produce that result are not coming from the customer. They're coming from, in the case of money, from taxpayers. In the case of the authority of the state, from the authorization that has been granted to the state by citizens, all right? Having said all that, I don't want to diminish the importance of trying to make sure that each of the transactions that citizens have with their government in their capacity as client beneficiaries or client obligatees, all right, is one that feels satisfying to them, at least in the sense that they've been fairly and justly treated and that the government hasn't made it a particularly unpleasant process, right? But still, it's not exactly, the goal of government is not necessarily to satisfy those particular clients and make them happy with everything that happened to them, all right? From the point of view of, now I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between what we might think of as citizen satisfaction with the transactions that occur, and focus instead on what is often the most important thing in the minds of citizens and taxpayers, which is whether we got the outcomes that we wanted to get from this effort as well. And maybe I could suggest the difference between this idea of citizen satisfaction and outcomes by describing my first experience when I was doing an evaluation of publicly supported drug treatment programs. And if I had thought the important outcome or the important goal of government in that was to make drug-addicted people satisfied, the way I would have evaluated the performance of that operation would be to check and see whether the drug-addicted people liked what happened to them or not. And if I'd done that, they would have said, yes, I liked the experience a lot. I liked it so much I kept coming back, right? But that wouldn't have been a very satisfactory answer to the people who were funding the program, because they were actually supporting the program for quite a different reason, which was that they hoped by providing services to drug addicts, the drug addicts would not only be happy to get a chance to clean themselves up, but they would behave in a variety of other ways as well, which was they would stop using drugs, they would stop committing crimes, they would get a job, and they'd do a better job of taking care of their family. Now, in any governmental activity, we would call those the outcomes of the program that were valued by the public and gave the justification for doing the program. But what's important about it is that the effects that we were hoping to get, right, didn't happen right at the boundary of the organization in the moment that the person was getting the treatment. And they didn't register only in the mind of the drug addict as whether it was a good or a bad experience from their point of view. It registered much further down a causal chain for each individual drug user. Did they change their behavior more or less permanently in these particular directions? And also in the accumulation across individuals of that encounter, which caused them to make a change in the total number of addicted people in the population and return them to a state where they could live with dignity and autonomy and also remain productive. So the relationship between the client transactions and outcomes is produced through the effects that those transactions have on the individuals as they affect their lives over time, and as those effects accumulate across individuals to produce an aggregate social result.